Goaltending. I don't know why, but today I want to talk about Pittsburgh Penguins goaltending. We have a lot to talk about in this video, so we're going to go over this intro real quick. The Penguins have had 72 goalies in their entire history, which sounds like not a lot, but when you think about it for more than a second, like, oh, you had like a starter for a good amount of years, Barrasso and Fleury, and then it was just another guy coming in. Today, I want to go over some of those other guys, as well as some of the guys before and after, in between the Barrasso and Fleury years, to kind of shed light on arguably the most important position in hockey. The title of this video is pretty self-explanatory. We are going to be going over the history of the Pittsburgh Penguins goaltending. I'm not going to go over all 72 goaltenders here, but we're going to talk about a lot, and we're going to start from the very beginning. Let's jump right into it. Now, it's easy to forget, but the Pittsburgh Penguins were an expansion team. And what I mean by that is in the aspect that, the Golden Knights and the Kraken were recent expansion teams. You think of them as expansion teams, not necessarily the Penguins, but back in the day, the Penguins had an expansion draft where they took players. Two players, Joe Daly and Roy Edwards, were the first goalies selected to the Pittsburgh Penguins. They both ended up playing for the team. Daly played 38 games and Edwards 15 games. And a lot of these guys on the board aren't, obviously your Fleury, Barrasso, 100, 200 plus games played with the franchise. But I feel like these players are notable in the history of the Penguins that we should mention them. Penguins also, with just Daly and Edwards on the roster, they wanted to boost their goaltending. They traded for veteran Hank Bassin, who played only 25 games with the Penguins, but he is notable in the aspect that he started the first ever game in Penguins history, a loss to the Montreal Canadiens, and the next game was a win against the St. Louis Blues. Hank Bassin is the first goaltender in Penguins history to win and lose. But if you're familiar with Penguins history, you know the real kind of first Pittsburgh Penguins goaltender, and that is Les Binkley, who the Penguins signed out of the WHL, and he became known as the first Penguins goalie ever, and really the main guy in the early years of the team. 196 games played for Binkley. Keep in mind the Penguins were mediocre to bad before I read off these stats. A 58-94-34 record and an .897 save percentage from 1967 to 1972. As a rookie, he placed 5th place for Calder votes his first year, which I know he didn't win the Calder, but for a lot of these goaltenders, I want to mention if they were even on the radar for getting major awards like the Calder, the Vezina, the Jennings, even the Hart for some of these goaltenders. The Penguins, unfortunately, have never had a goaltender win the Vezina or the Calder or Hart. They have had goaltenders that have played for them, Fleury, Barrasso, win the Vezina, in Barrasso's case, the Calder elsewhere. But for Binkley, a 5th place Calder finish in his rookie year when he was 33 years old, not bad for a struggling Penguins expansion team. And that's part of the reason I wanted to do this video, was to recognize guys like Binkley who, Barrasso and Fleury come in and they kind of overshadow him. But if it wasn't for Binkley, maybe the Penguins aren't as stable as they even were shaky back in the day. Another name that I'm sure many Penguins fans are familiar with, modern Penguins fans, is Jim Rutherford, our former general manager, former goaltender, and in the Hockey Hall of Fame as a builder, not as a player, but he was a player. The Penguins had their first goaltending controversy in the mid-70s when Rutherford came in. From 1971 to 1974, it was kind of in between him and Binkley. Keep in mind, unless you were like the Montreal Canadiens and had Ken Dryden and Jacques Plante, this era of goaltending just across the league, you really didn't necessarily have the true starter that we have like 50, 60 plus games today. It was kind of just whoever was playing the best. And Rutherford at times was that goaltender. His name is obviously very popular in Pittsburgh hockey lore due to what he did as a general manager, but on the ice, a pretty decent, serviceable career. 115 games played with the Penguins, a 44, 49, and 14 record, and an .899 save percentage. Other goaltenders in the early years that I want to mention real quick include Al Smith, who played 91 games. He was kind of the starter in between Binkley and Rutherford, even at times with them. Him and Binkley were on the Penguins' first ever playoff team in 1970, where they lost to the Blues. Cam Newton, he only played 16 games for the Penguins, but I have to mention that name. It's not the Cam Newton you're thinking of. Similarly, with a interesting name, Bob Johnson. No, not the coach. He played 12 games for the Penguins, but I wanted to mention him because he is the father of a future Johnson goaltender, Brent Johnson, that we will talk about later. And then Andy Brown, who played 45 games for the Penguins. He was the last goalie to not wear a mask in the entire NHL, and he did so with the Penguins. So a lot of turnover. Binkley, Rutherford, yeah, the main guys in the early years. Wait till we get to what's coming down here. But there's one goaltender I want to talk about before that who's kind of in his own category, Dennis Hron. The reason he's kind of in his own category is because he played for the Penguins on 3 separate stints over the course of 10-ish years. Hron was one of the first notable Penguins goaltending draft picks in 1972. He was one of the ones that actually made the NHL and did some things. He's another example of why I wanted to make this video. Very underrated guy who did a lot for the franchise, and before Barrasso and Fleury came around, he was the Penguins' all-time leader in pretty much every goaltending statistic: wins, losses, games played, save percentage, goals against, all that stuff. He played from the Penguins from 1972 to 1975, left, came back from 1976 to 1979, left again, then came back from 1982 to 1986. He was traded from the Penguins 2 times, so the Penguins got back stuff from him. But just in general, I know there's gaps in that, but Hron played with the Sil Apps-led Penguins all the way to being on the team with Mario. 290 games played in a Penguins uniform for him, an 88, 113, and 44 record. Again, Penguins aren't very good at this time. I would definitely say he's an above average goaltender because when the Penguins traded him to the Canadiens, he ended up winning the Vezina. Asterisk on that. I just learned, as a longtime hockey fan, nonetheless, that the Vezina back in the day was kind of like the Jennings. So Hron won it alongside some of the other goaltenders. He won it with the Canadiens. He still won it, so definitely worth mentioning. Okay, and then if you can read here, you see that I nicknamed this next category Miscellaneous, and Hron's already in it. Honestly, you could consider the entire early history of the Penguins goaltending miscellaneous, and no offense to any of these guys, but the Penguins didn't have a full, true-fledged starter, and that's hard to find in the National Hockey League. Obviously, if you're familiar with Penguins history, in the pre-Lemieux years, the Penguins had a lot of roster turnover and were just a bad team. So Hron's kind of in this category, but these guys I'm going to go over kind of quickly. Gary Innes played 100 games exactly from 1973 to 1976 with the Penguins. The Penguins signed him as a free agent after a good training camp, and he kind of was sort of the starter. A lot of these guys were sort of the starter, sort of the backup. Again, playing the hot goalie. Michel Place, or Placey, I'm assuming it's a French-Canadian name. I don't know how to pronounce it exactly. He played 75 games with the Penguins from 74 to 76, and he was the former first overall pick in the NHL draft by the Canadiens in 68. Dunk Wilson, 66 games from 76 to 78. He was another journeyman backup that became the Penguins starter briefly and was named team MVP in 1977. Greg Millen, 135 games played from 1978 to 1981. He was a Penguins' own draft pick from 1977, and he's now a media guy for Sportsnet and Hockey Night in Canada. Then we'll take a small break from going fully rapid style and talk briefly about Michel Dion, who I think is the most notable goaltender from this time frame. 151 games played from 1981 to 1985. He was a starter for the Penguins for about 3.5 years, and I view him as an above-average goaltender. He came over from the WHA with the Indianapolis Razors and won like the Vezina equivalent there. The Hatskin Award is the top goalie in the WHA. And he was nominated, like fully nominated, not like he finished 5th or 6th. He was in the top 3 for the Vezina in 81-82 with the Penguins, but ultimately lost to Billy Smith. That year, he also did play in the All-Star game. So again, not a bad goaltender here. The Penguins did make the playoffs briefly those couple of years with Dion as their starting goaltenders. Back-to-back years, lost obviously. And then the tank for Lemieux happened, and Dion was one of the goaltenders that was sort of sent down to the minors because I guess he was struggling. I'm sure he was struggling, but also maybe a little bit of tanking there. And after his stint in the minors, he later retired. So again, another underrated goaltender who I actually am lucky enough to have a hockey card of that I think should be acknowledged in Penguins history. Then we get to Roberto Romano, 125 games played from 1982 to 1987, then another separate stint very briefly in 1994. Romano was mostly a backup, but then he also kind of came the pseudo-starter. Again, a lot of these goaltenders kind of 1A, 1B type thing, 1C in some cases. He was definitely the Penguin starter in 85-86 with 46 games played that year. Then we get to Gilles Meloche, who I know a lot of these guys, like I'm just going over a lot of stuff here, but I promise there's some interesting things about some of these guys. because part of the reason I wanted to do this was to differentiate a lot of these names that I had heard before and never watched because I was too young growing up with a lot of these guys, and who was like actually the good goaltenders. But getting on to Gilles Meloche, 104 games played for the Penguins from 85 to 88. Meloche played for the Penguins at the very end of his career. He signed with them when he was over the age of 35. He was a longtime goaltender for the Golden/Normal Seals and the Minnesota North Stars. Also, his son, Eric, ended up playing for the early 2000s Penguin as a right winger. Most notable to me, at least, is that Meloche stayed with the Penguins after retirement and became a goaltending coach. So he now does have his name on the Stanley Cup 3 times, in 91, 92, and 2009. Awesome. Speaking of 91 and 92, let's finally get into the Tom Barrasso years. So far we've covered everything from 67. Now we're up into 80s, late 80s, early 90s. Tom Barrasso, let's read off the stats first. 460 games played with the Penguins from 1988 to 2000. A 226, 153, and 53 record. An .895 save percentage. Save percentage is, debated on how good of a stat that is. And a 3.27 goals against average. He did also play in a high-scoring era. He is a Hockey Hall of Famer as of 2023 and is one of the greatest goaltenders of all time, no question. However, he is somehow the second best goaltender, and I don't think there's really any debate on that, in Penguins history. Fleury has passed him. When the Penguins traded for Barrasso and Paul Coffey in the late 80s with Lemieux, it really sent shockwaves around the league that, the Penguins are going to go to win now. They're trying to win hard. Thankfully, it worked. But those guys, Coffey had won multiple cups with the Oilers and is a Norris-level defenseman, offensive defenseman, and Barrasso, coming off what he did with the Sabres, he won the Calder and the Vezina his rookie year and was one of the best goaltenders in the league, young goaltenders as well. And for the Penguins to get both of those pieces, then add Trottier and Francis, it was only a matter of time before they won the Stanley Cup. Thankfully, they did twice. That trade, though, it just blows my mind. That trade was Tom Barrasso and a third-round pick in 1990, which became Joe Dzidek, who played a couple of games for the Penguins, for Doug Bodger, who was a Penguins first-round pick, notably in the Lemieux draft, and Darren Shannon, another prospect for the Penguins. That is an absolute fleecing by the Penguins. Obviously, Barrasso went on to be a significant goaltender in Penguins history, had all the records up until Fleury came around, and was the starting goaltender in 91 and 92. He's the first American-born goaltender to win 300 or more games. I personally believe his number 35 should be retired in Pittsburgh. Tristan Jarry's wearing it now. He did have some injury trouble, which I necessarily don't remember because he literally left the Penguins before I was born. That kind of paved the way for some of these other goaltenders that we'll talk about, where the Penguins had to bring in some other guys that kind of became the starters. He is also the all-time leader in the entire National Hockey League in goaltending points, just beating out Grant Fuhr and Martin Brodeur, who had 47 points. Barrasso has 48 points. All of them were assists. In the case of Brodeur, he has a couple goals. Barrasso never scored a goal, let alone for the Penguins. 48 points is a lot for a goalie. That's awesome. He's currently coaching the Hanover Scorpions in Germany in a German hockey league. Good for him. So the Barrasso years span a good long amount of time, but he obviously wasn't the only goaltender that played for the Penguins in that time. He was injured a lot and missed some time, as any athlete would. So there are definitely some goaltenders I want to mention in this era. Wendell Young, 111 games played from 88 to 92, and then he came back in 94 and 95. He is the only player in hockey history that has won the Stanley Cup, NHL, the Memorial Cup, which might be the hardest trophy to win, in the CHL, the Calder Cup in the AHL, and the Turner Cup, which is in the International Hockey League. He's the only player to win all 4 of them. Young obviously was one of the backups for the 91-92 teams. Kenny Reggett, probably the most notable backup in the Barrasso years. No, not Jack Tolliver. 212 games played from 91 to 98. And I think more so than any other goaltender here, Barrasso was hurt a lot, and at times Reggett had to step in and kind of be the starter for the Penguins. He's exactly what you would want out of a backup. He challenged for the role of starter. He came in when your starter was hurt, And he played a lot of games in some seasons where Barrasso was pretty much wiped out for the entirety of it. Then we got Frank Pietrangelo, who was a distant cousin from Alex Pietrangelo. And when I was in Vegas, I knew this, and I asked Alex about it. I'm like, hey, why do you pronounce your name Pietrangelo and your long distant cousin pronounces it Pietrangelo? He goes, wow, they just pronounce it wrong over there. 87 games played with the Penguins for Pietrangelo from 87 to 94. He most notably stepped in the 91 playoffs when Barrasso was hurt against the Devils and made a huge save on Peter Stastny, which is notably gone down as the save in Penguins hockey lore. Quick tangent here. Yes, the save was a very important save. Every single NHL franchise, even the Kraken and the Mammoth, have the save. We need a more creative name. Now we get into the transition years, because we didn't unfortunately go from Barrasso to Fleury, and gee, it's a little hard to find a franchise goaltender like that. Penguins might have had one, as they drafted Patrick Lalime in the 6th round of the 1993 NHL draft. He debuted in 96-97, looked great, and got votes for the Calder, finishing 5th. 39 games played that year, and then that was it. Penguins at this time, if you know your Penguins history, money troubles, and there was a contract dispute between Lalime and the Penguins. The Penguins end up trading him actually to the Ducks, but then he ends up signing with the Ottawa Senators. Plays a decent, solid career there, and that was it. The Penguins may have had something in Lalime, and they just give him up because they couldn't afford him. It really kind of goes to show this era of Penguins hockey. Then we have J.S. Aubin, Jean-Sebastian Aubin. 168 games played from 1998 to 2004. I think probably the most notable goalie in this short era. He was a Penguins 3rd-round draft pick in 1995. He was slightly above average on a rebuilding, retooling Penguins team before he left as a free agent for Toronto. Then we get Johan Hedberg, also pretty notable in this time period. 116 games played from 2000 to 2001, so not a lot of years there, but a lot of games. He truly emerged as the Penguins starter there on a kind of sneaky good Penguins teams. I know this era can kind of get misinterpreted like, oh, after the 90s, the Penguins sucked, and then they got Crosby. No, the Penguins went to the conference finals and had a decent couple of runs here in the early 2000s before Jágr left. And the Penguins went on a Cinderella run in the 2002 playoffs, beating the Sabres, who were led by Dominik Hasek in goal, and the Capitals, who were led by Ole the goalie, Ole Kolzig. And Hedberg outdueled them and got the Penguins all to the Eastern Conference Finals, where you do lose to Marc-Andre Brodeur and the Devils there. When Hedberg joined the Penguins, he still had Manitoba Moose equipment, most notably his helmet, so the Penguins thought, oh, we're just going to nickname him Moose. After his cup of tea with the Penguins traded him to the Canucks for a draft pick. That draft pick became Alex Goligoski, which then leads into the biggest trade tree in Penguins history that now includes Erik Karlsson, Phil Kessel's in it, and yeah. I'm going to make an updated video on that if Karlsson ever gets traded. Moving on to Sebastian Caron, 90 games played from 2002 to 2006. He was a 1999 3rd-round pick by the Penguins. Now the Penguins, after the early 2000s, now we're in the mid-2000s, now they're really bad. And Caron and eventually Fleury, who the Penguins draft 1st overall in 2003, are viewed as the next generation of goaltenders. Caron may have made the greatest save in NHL history against the Flyers in a tie late game on Brian Savage. He completely stretched out, full extension with the left glove. You have to see it for yourself. But Caron, I unfortunately kind of remember him as coming in at the wrong place in the wrong time. You come in on a struggling Penguins team, so you're not going to have great teams in front of you. Then the lockout happens and your momentum completely shifts. Then a guy named Marc-Andre Fleury gets drafted 1st overall and quite blatantly steals your job. And we get into the Fleury years. Now this might be, I'd have to count, but this might be the longest section in terms of years here. Fleury was with the Penguins for a good 13-14 years as the starter up until the very end. And I have a video on the now retired Marc-Andre Fleury, so I'm gonna kind of go over this pretty quickly because I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with this era. 691 games played. That is the most all-time in Penguins history, obviously, and I believe that's top 10 in just games played. 375 wins, 216 losses, and 68 ties or overtime losses. A .917 save percentage, a 2.58 goals against average, and a 1st overall pick. And I would be astonished if number 29 is not retired. And he's not in the Hall of Fame. He's the all-time leader in every major goaltending statistic. for the Penguins, and he's up there all time in just the NHL. He lost his job in the 2016 playoffs because he was hurt, and a young Matt Murray comes in, but he kind of regained it and split the duties with him in 2017, going out on a bang with the Penguins, winning the Stanley Cup until a couple weeks ago where he came back for his last game with the Penguins, a preseason game against the Blue Jackets where he won, and it was awesome. Thank you, Marc-Andre Fleury. Just go watch my Fleury video. But Fleury, again, was not the only goaltender in this era for the Penguins. A lot of notable backups I want to mention real quick. Danny Sabarin, 44 games played for him. From 2007 to 2009, a reliable backup. He was with the team in 2009, but he does not have his name on the cup because Matthew Garon came in. Ty Conklin, only 33 games played, but most notably started the 2008 Winter Classic because Fleury couldn't go. Career with the Penguins, 2007 to 2009. Brent Johnson, 2009 to 2012 with the Penguins, son of the Bob Johnson we mentioned earlier. 62 games played and a knockout punch to Rick DiPietro. Thomas Vokoun, only 20 games played, but I definitely wanted to mention him in the 2012-2013 season where the Penguins went all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. He was brought in to help Fleury as a veteran presence, but both of them struggled, and then the 2013 playoffs happened. They kind of split the duties. The Penguins can't get to the Cup final, get swept embarrassingly by the Bruins that year. Then Jeff Zatkoff, kind of the opposite of Vokoun, backup goalie who had some success in the playoffs, 35 games played from 2013 to 2016, and famously Mr. Game 1, starting when neither Murray or Fleury could go against the New York Rangers, and he came in and won that game. Good for him. I love Jeff Zatkoff. He is also one of the few goaltenders that Alex Ovechkin has played against, and he never scored on him. And then, now we're into modern times. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the stories and the current goaltending situations for the Penguins the past 10-ish years. The writing was on the wall for Fleury to go to Vegas, and that is indeed what happens. Matt Murray becomes the starter for the Penguins. It was the right move at the time. I will defend that to the grave, but it just didn't work out. And in retrospect, keeping Fleury probably would have been better. Matt Murray had a lot of issues with injury, even just his mental health off the ice. And, I'm not dissing him or anything. He was a great goaltender in those cup runs. His rookie year, he got Calder votes. People were saying he could have won the Conn Smythe. But as a full starter in the NHL, being the number one guy, things didn't really work out for just under 200 games at 199 from 2016 to 2020. He was a Penguins draft pick in 2012, which was in Pittsburgh, that draft, in the third round. But again, he struggled and was eventually moved on to the Ottawa Senators because the Penguins had another goaltender that was thought that could potentially take over things and become the new starter, Tristan Jarry. Another Penguins draft pick and homegrown player. Jarry is obviously on the Penguins still right now, but I want to mention, we're kind of forgetting, he was a very solid goaltender when he first came in. He has gotten Vezina votes in his career. Matt Murray never did. Kind of the 2020-2021 season where Jarry fully came in. Murray was traded by that point, and Jarry fully came in as the Penguins starter. In 2022, Jarry went to the All-Star game and had Vezina votes that year. So for a couple of years there, Jarry was really thought to be a good, solid future goaltender for the Penguins, so Kyle Dubas extends him to the contract that he's on now, and then he kind of just really struggles as the Penguins missed the playoffs 3 straight years, also in the playoffs when they were there. There was the Islanders series and those goals that he gave up in that. And now, right now, the future is very shaky for Tristan Jarry. I think if he could be moved, he will be. I'm not going to get into current events really with the Penguins, but it doesn't seem likely that Jarry is the future of this team. However, he has played nearly 300 games, 294 games played with the Penguins as of this recording. He is now third in pretty much all major goaltending statistics behind Barrasso and Fleury. And obviously he's on the team now, and we'll get to kind of what's going on in the future or current era of the Penguins. Also, 2 other quick goaltenders I do want to absolutely mention in the current era is Casey DeSmith. 134 games played for a backup pretty much primarily. From 2018 to 2023, I always viewed Casey DeSmith as just a perfect backup. Even at times it was 1A, 1B. I just have always liked him. I like goaltenders who, not that I don't want them to pressure to be a starter, but I like, even in the NFL, guys that are backups that embrace being the backup are your best backups, quarterbacks, goalies. Then you had Alex Nedeljkovic, kind of 1A, 1B the last couple of years. 76 games played from 2024 to 2025, and I obviously have to mention he scored a goal as well. I didn't actually mention that for Jarry. Tristan Jarry scored the first ever goal in Penguins goalie history, and then Nedeljkovic did it last year. So, on to the future, even though I do have two goaltenders who have played for the Penguins so far. Archer Shilovs, who's on the current roster, and Joel Blomqvist, who is on the current in the still organization. And then you got Sergei Murashov, who is highly regarded and projected to be the Penguins' starting goaltender as soon as next year. Russian-born goaltender who has just torn it up in the minors. I've liked what I've seen out of him so far, but he has still yet to make his NHL debut. So this video is the history of the Pittsburgh Penguins, not the future, but I'm excited for Murashov. And that's a lot of goaltenders we just talked about, and that's not all of them. But I think I did a pretty good job going over the most important ones in Penguins history. Goalies are just weird, obviously, them as people. But goaltending is such an odd position where it can kind of get forgotten, but also at the same time, it's maybe the most important position on the ice. The Penguins have had 3 Hall of Fame goaltenders. Barrasso, Fleury, I'm saying, is going to make it there. And Jim Rutherford, who is in the Hall of Fame, but he is in it as a builder. And then the final last thing I wanted to mention was every goaltender that has won officially the Stanley Cup with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So these guys have their name engraved in the Stanley Cup. Marc-Andre Fleury in 2009, 2016, and 2017. Gilles Malache in 1991, 1992, and 2009 as a goalie coach. Tom Barrasso in 1991 and 1992. Matt Murray in 2016 and 2017. Jim Rutherford as general manager in 2016 and 2017. Wendell Young as backup in 1991 and 1992. Les Binkley as a scout in 1991 and 1992, but he only has his name etched in 1992 for some reason, even though he was on the team in 91 as well. Frank Pietrangelo in 1991. Ken Reggett in 1992. Matthew Guerin in 2009. And Jeff Zatkoff in 2016. Thank you guys all for watching this probably very long video on the history of the Pittsburgh Penguins goaltendings. Like, comment, subscribe. Go Penguins.